at this point, I think there is a growing consensus across even some mainstream commentators that the Civil Rights Act is a problem. There are two minds about this. I'm one of these people who says it just needs to go. It just needs to be thrown out. It's the alternative constitution of the United States. It's inherently destructive. You're basically just giving the government this blank check to be able to walk into the personal lives of every human being in the United States. It's basically Soviet style thought police, but that we've just kind of said is okay because of political correctness. Now, on the other side of that, I've had guys like Chris Rufo, who again has acknowledged the problems of the Civil Rights Act. He's not saying it's not an issue, but he says we need to leave. I think he said something to the effect of a night watchman civil rights regime in place because the racism has become so anti-white and anti-Jewish and anti-Asian now that we still need this government apparatus and we just need to move it the other direction. Now, I'm certainly happy with Harmeet Dillon changing the way that the Civil Rights Division works. She's certainly doing much better work there that has been done in a long time. But I am worried that by leaving that infrastructure in place, you are ultimately just opening up this, an inevitable return to this being weaponized against the right. What are your thoughts on keeping the Civil Rights Act around in an attempt to stop anti-white racism?
No, I don't think it's going to work that way. I also don't like the whole concept behind it, that somehow the state has a right to, as I said, to, have windows into our souls. I don't like that. I also do not like the state telling me what I must do with my house, my property, because very quickly it moves, into laws against speech and hate speech and so forth, which we already have in many states. And property rights go, freedom of expression goes. And this has happened very, very quickly in the United States. It's not that you passed the Civil Rights Act in 1964 and then all these things happen 60 years later. No, it's like almost overnight that you get a chain of developments, leading into an oppressive anti-discrimination regime. It's happening by 1965. You already have affirmative action even then. My view of this is that one does not have to defend segregation, Jim Crow, any of these things. You can say, in fact, there were, blacks were treated in an unfair, discriminatory fashion in 1950, 1940, whenever you want to start this. But the laws that were passed to deal with this were in many cases overkill, and you can't get rid of their effects. I mean, we simply have to deal with what they have produced, the government bureaucracies, the Civil Rights Commission. And I think, although I like Chris a great deal and I like his scholarship, I'm afraid I can't agree with him. I think the best thing would be simply to get rid of this stuff. Which means the Democrats, if God forbid they ever come back into power, because they are left-wing totalitarians now, they will simply try to reenact this. You'll get it. You'll get it once again. All the things they did before. Otherwise, they would have to go through the motions of passing new laws, which would take some time. But to me, an analogy that comes to mind is the French Revolution. That I'm willing to concede that before the French Revolution, peasants were forced to perform these corvées, these labor duties. This was wrong. I'm happy that manorial obligations were removed in France. This is fine. But the French Revolution was a horror. It resulted in millions of deaths. It even had a bad effect on France economically, politically, and in other ways. So one doesn't have to express jubilation about attempts to remedy past evils. If these remedies result in a loss of freedom, have dangerous consequences, and I think the civil rights revolution has. I also see that the requirement that we treat blacks and women equal, whatever this, the 64 civil rights require. I see this going very quickly into laws about homosexuals, then laws about transgender. You just move from one to the other. It's before you can blink your eyes, you're going from one to the other because you already have these agencies in place, and you have created a sense of guilt among in the normal white Christian population of this country. They did something horrible back then. We have to spend the rest of our life atoning. It's unlimited atonement, for this terrible thing. Yesterday, I heard the speech that was given by Kamala Harris. I don't know if you remember this, when the Biden administration decided to give us Indigenous Peoples Day instead of Columbus' birthday. And she was going on just ranting against these white Europeans, what terrible people they were. And, I'm thinking that what would happen if somebody gave a similar speech about Jews in Israel? How would they react? They'd be indignant, and justifiably so, by the way. Or Japanese, you committed all these atrocities. But I think that much of the white Christian population in America has become masochistic. They seem almost to revel in guilt, or impose this guilt on others whom they don't like. Ascribe this guilt to other white Christians. But I thought her speech was shocking. And yet we got Indigenous people. They took Trump to get rid of it and go back to Columbus Day. But I think all of this comes out of the era of the civil rights movement and the attempt to lay a guilt trip on us, which has been going on for decades now. So the more you can get rid of this at this point, the better. I don't think we're going to go back to being a segregated society if we get rid of anything like that. that's not likely to happen. So whatever limited good they may have done, they've already performed. And now I agree with you. I mean, the effects of these laws are just odious.
So one of the concepts that I've become fascinated in, and I see it across many different authors now, is this idea of, obviously, traditions and ways of being particular to different nations, different peoples. But as they expand, as they tend to embrace an imperial life cycle of civilizations, every civilization seems to want to test itself, to
Right.
expand at some level, to enforce its will on those around them. And as that occurs, we obviously have to change and shift that mode of being, that way of being. It has to expand out. You need to start codifying it formally in documents and spreading it through rules and standardizations and things to make the empire, these kind of things work. And as that occurs, it seems to alter significantly that way of being. Once it expands beyond the original population that was supposed to live in that way, it seems to have a deleterious impact. I think both Dugan and Land were expressing this kind of Heideggerian idea of civilizational Daseins, right? And the way in which once those move beyond their natural boundaries, they start to warp. And so my question for you is that liberalism just going through the inevitable progression of any way of being that becomes an abstract ideology that has to be spread over an empire? Or did the modernization of the managerial class and its ability to scale things beyond make this process even more radical in this iteration, in the liberal expansion, than perhaps it would have been in something, say, the Roman Empire? Is there some interaction with those different forces that kind of has led us to the current outcome?
Yeah, I think I'd give an answer that you'd give, that that managerialization begins in the liberal era. And liberals were not really anti-managerial. If you read Hegel or other people writing about Hegel, was a liberal, I suppose, in the German political context. But if you read others talking about managerial, someone like François Guizot in France, who spoke about the bureaucracy as la classe capacitaire, they're the ones with capability, or they're part of the classe capacitaire, which would embrace the educated bourgeoisie, and there was nothing to fear because they would operate within a limited sphere of authority, and they would make government fairer. We have also in 1881 an act by which we create a federal bureaucracy in the United States. It was not seen in the 19th century to be something that would absorb, engulf, everything seized power, which is what it's done. But people living back then did not really see this happening, and it's only in the 20th century that this becomes a serious problem, right? And then, of course, with the progressive era, and then with social democracy and so forth, there's a glorification of managerial rule, which I point out in my book After Liberalism. Um, so this is not something that was necessarily part of the original liberal package, but it was a development which early liberals didn't fear at all. They thought it was fine. People like themselves would manage the government. It would be kept out of the hands of the rabble, because they were afraid of mass democracy.
Right.
And this would prevent mass democracy. So, I mean, of course, what it would do is I argue, you have an alliance of managerialism and mass democracy that results in this sort of globalist monstrosity in the end. But I'm afraid liberals in the 19th century did not see this. And I think the managerialization of the world, things that Burnham and others began talking about, in the 1940s, 1950s, this has occurred. And what I would argue has made the situation even worse is that the managerial class has bought into various post-Christian egalitarian homogenizing ideologies, wokeness being the most recent, and I think in many ways the most pernicious. So that in order to be a democracy, you must have a managerial state and you must have woke ideology. Otherwise, you can't join the democracy club anymore.